The evidence for something which is otherwise unprecedented is always going to be a bit odd, and we all know that. And one of the things we have to bear in mind is that everybody in the first century, including Jesus' followers, knew that people didn't rise from the dead just like that. Oh, there were stories, there were guesses, there were maybe this might happen or had happened. But for the Jews of Jesus' day, the idea of the resurrection, which was a very powerful idea at the time, was not about one person being raised from the dead in the middle of ongoing history, but about God's purposes coming to their climax, about new creation, new heavens, new earth, and all God's people being raised from the dead at the same time. What the very early Christians believed right from the start, as far as we can see, was that this promise, which the Jewish people had held onto, actually came true in the life of one person. And that is such an innovation, such an extraordinary thing, which was unprecedented and unheard of and unthought of at the time, that it forces you to examine the evidence for it. And as I've done my best in my own historical and theological work to examine the evidence, it comes down to two things. One is we can be absolutely sure that Jesus' tomb was empty on Easter morning, and we can be absolutely sure that his followers saw and met and conversed with and ate with a figure that they very certainly took to be Jesus, even though he seemed slightly different. And that too is one of the extraordinary features of the stories, that if you were making up these stories years and years later, as some people have, of course, suggested, you wouldn't do it like that. Indeed, the appearance of Jesus himself is one of the things that nobody would have made up like that. I've studied all the ancient Jewish documents on what the hope of resurrection was, and in some cases, it's rather like people going up into the sky and shining like stars, and in other cases, it's like people coming back into exactly the same sort of life all over again. But the picture of Jesus in the stories at the end of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't either of those. The risen Jesus doesn't shine like a star, but nor is he just here in the way that he was before. He seems to be inhabiting heaven and earth simultaneously and can pass effortlessly between the two. This is extraordinary. It is, as I say again, unprecedented. And it's for these and similar reasons that I and many others have said the reason the tomb was empty and the reason they met this person they took to be the risen Jesus is that on the third day after his death, Jesus of Nazareth was transformed so that his dead body became a living body, not the reanimation of a corpse. This is not a resuscitation. It's not coming back into the present life. It's going on into a new life, the other side of death, a life which death and pain and suffering can no longer touch, which is why the early Christians said, that's the model for what God will do for all of us who follow Jesus. Now, so as I look at the evidence, I say, these stories are extraordinary. They're unprecedented. They're very, very strange. Why would people make them up like that? And why would there be so many undesigned coincidences and all sorts of other things? And the best evidence, the best answer for that evidence is that it really did happen like that. Now, it's perfectly possible, faced with that argument, for a perfectly intelligent person to say, well, I hear what you say, but as far as I'm concerned, dead people don't rise, so I just choose to believe that there must be some other explanation. At that point, I think the biblical theologian has nothing more to say except, well, you take your choice, but please go on pondering this particular evidence, because once you put that into the middle of the picture, then the whole of the first century landscape makes sense in a way it really doesn't any other way. And that's the sort of proof that historians very often have to rely on.